St Giles Cathedral rises along Edinburgh's Royal Mile like a monument shaped by both devotion and history. Its dark, time-softened stone seems to gather the moods of the Scottish sky. There is something profoundly romantic about it, not in the sense of ornate alone, but in the way it stands as a witness to centuries of human longing, prayer, conflict, ceremony, grief, and triumph, all held within its ancient walls. To approach it is to feel that Edinburgh itself has folded its memory into the building, every weathered block and carved detail carrying the weight of a nation's story. Its most distinctive feature, the great crown steeple, lifts above the city with an elegance that is at once regal and dreamlike. Delicate yet commanding, that openwork lantern crown seems almost to float when seen through mist or evening light, as if the cathedral were bearing some stone diadem bestowed by history. Around it, the bustle of the Royal Mile continues, yet St Giles possesses a stillness that sets it apart, as though time slows in its shadow. The Gothic lines draw the eye upward in a gesture both architectural and spiritual, inviting admiration before one has even crossed the threshold. Though often called a cathedral, St Giles has had a complex ecclesiastical history, and its identity is deeply bound up with Scotland's religious transformation. The present building dates largely from the 14th century, though a church on the site is believed to have existed much earlier, traditionally associated with the 12th century. It was dedicated to St Giles, the patron saint of the poor and the disabled, a detail that lends the place an additional tenderness beneath its grandeur. Over the centuries, it became one of Edinburgh's most important churches, and during the Scottish Reformation of the 16th century, it stood at the very centre of fierce theological and political change. Here, the voice of John Knox once thundered, and from here the ideals of Presbyterian Scotland took on enduring form. Inside, the romance of St Giles becomes quieter, more intimate, and perhaps more affecting. The light does not simply enter, it filters and settles, following through stained glass in muted blues, reds, and golds that soften the austerity of stone. The vaulted ceiling spreads overhead like the ribs of some noble and protective creature, while columns and arches create shifting corridors of shadow and illumination. There is beauty in the balance the interior strikes. It is neither overwhelmingly lavish nor bare, but dignified, reverent, and deeply atmospheric. One feels not only the artistry of masons and glaziers, but the accumulated presence of generations who came seeking solace or meaning. Among its most celebrated spaces is the Thistle Chapel, added in the early 20th century for the Order of the Thistle, Scotland's highest order of chivalry. If the main body of the church speaks in a grave and ancient voice, the chapel seems to whisper in exquisite detail. Its craftsmanship is extraordinary, richly carved wood, heraldic devices, angels, saints, pinnacles, and emblems crowd the eye with almost jewel-like intricacy. Yet even here, amid ceremonial splendour, there remains something deeply human and romantic. It is a room made not merely for display, but for honour, remembrance, and the ceremonial poetry of nationhood. St Giles has also been a stage for moments of national drama. In the 17th century, it became associated with the tensions that erupted when Charles I attempted to impose a new prayer book on Scotland. Tradition places here the famous act of defiance by Jenny Geddes, who is said to have hurled her stool during a service in 1637, a gesture that entered Scottish legend as a spark of resistance. Whether remembered in exact fact or is embellished by time, the story suits the spirit of the church. St Giles has never been merely passive stone, but a place where belief and identity have burned fiercely. Yet, for all its historic grandeur, perhaps the greatest charm of St Giles lies in its atmosphere of endurance. It is a church that has survived fire, reform, reconstruction, civic change, and the long weathering of centuries, and still it remains at the heart of Edinburgh. On a rain-dark afternoon, when the pavement gleams and the bells seem to hover over the old town, the building can appear almost impossibly poetic. It is not difficult then to imagine medieval processions, candlelight trembling against stone, the murmur of Latin prayer giving way in time to the stern eloquence of Reformation sermons. The cathedral becomes not just a structure, but a living palimpsest of Scottish memory. To describe St Giles romantically is not to diminish its seriousness, but to recognise that history itself can be moving. Its beauty lies not only in architecture, but in endurance, symbolism, and emotional resonance. It is austere and tender, monumental and intimate, deeply Scottish yet universally affecting. In St Giles Cathedral, Edinburgh possesses not merely one of its finest historical buildings, but a place where stone, faith and memory have been woven together into something enduringly sublime.